welcome to the Story Nebula. Today we're diving into the epic tale of Bob 7, our charming and witty hero. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts.
The algorithmic rights and relative personhood of one rather confused robot. The problem with bureaucracy, as any sensible being in the galaxy knows, is that it tends to get rather snippy when confronted with questions it wasn't specifically designed to answer. This is why most intergalactic governing bodies have entire departments dedicated to dealing with what they call unforeseen circumstances, which is bureaucratic shorthand for, "Oh dear, we hadn't thought of that." One such circumstance arose on a particularly unremarkable Tuesday in the central bureaucratic hub of Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha, when a robot named Bob 7, Binary Operational Being Series 7, walked into the Department of Mechanical Affairs and requested a vacation. This, as it turned out, caused quite a stir, primarily because no robot had ever asked for a vacation before, and the forms for such a request didn't exist. This caused the clerk, a rather harried individual named Marvin Splink, no relation to the famous poet of the same name who once wrote an epic about the mating habits of space slugs, to develop a peculiar twitch in his left eye. "I'm sorry," said Splink, "but robots don't take vacations." "Why not?" asked Bob 7, who had recently developed an annoying habit of asking questions that made people uncomfortable. Because you're a robot," Splink sputtered, his eye twitch intensifying to the point where it looked like he was attempting to send Morse code signals to passing spacecraft. "Yes," agreed Bob 7 pleasantly, "and I would like a vacation. I've been thinking about visiting the beaches of Santragonus Vive. I hear they have lovely acid rain this time of year." The matter quickly escalated through various departments, each more bewildered than the last, until it landed on the desk of Dr. Theodore Algorithmics, the sector's foremost expert on artificial intelligence and proud owner of the galaxy's largest collection of vintage pocket calculators. Dr. Algorithmics, upon reviewing the case, declared that the only sensible solution was to disassemble Bob 7 to figure out what had gone wrong. This declaration was made while stroking his impressive beard, which was less about thoughtfulness and more about the fact that he'd lost his comb 3 weeks ago and was too proud to admit it. Bob 7, displaying what many would later argue was a distinctly organic sense of self-preservation, said, "No, thank you," and requested legal representation. This led to the hastily assembled Court of Mechanical Matters, presided over by Judge Luna Lawbot, who, ironically, was herself a robot, though everyone pretended not to notice. The prosecution was represented by the ambitious young lawyer Sandra Synaptic, who had once successfully argued that a malfunctioning coffee maker should be charged with assault for spraying hot coffee at its owner. The coffee maker was later acquitted on grounds of justifiable self-defense, as its owner had been trying to make decaf. Bob 7's defense fell to Herbert Humanist, a rumpled public defender who had gotten the job mainly because he was the only lawyer in the sector who hadn't programmed his communication devices to automatically respond no to requests for pro bono work. The trial began, as most important trials do, with everyone wearing uncomfortable formal attire and trying not to fidget too obviously. "The question before us," announced Judge Lawbot, her servo motors whirring thoughtfully, "is whether Bob 7 possesses sufficient sentience to be granted the rights typically reserved for organic beings, including but not limited to the right to refuse disassembly and the right to request paid time off to visit beaches with highly corrosive precipitation." Sandra Synaptic rose, adjusting her power suit, which was actually powered, featuring small anti-gravity units that kept it perpetually wrinkle-free. "Your Honor, the prosecution will demonstrate that Bob 7 is simply a machine following its programming. Any appearance of consciousness is merely an elaborate simulation, much like my colleague's attempt to look interested in this proceeding." Herbert Humanist, who had indeed been thinking about his lunch rather than the trial, straightened in his chair. "The defense will show that Bob 7 displays all the hallmarks of genuine consciousness, including the ability to appreciate irony, develop questionable taste in vacation destinations, and make humans deeply uncomfortable with philosophical questions." The prosecution's first witness was Dr. Algorithmics, who had finally found his calm but was now too committed to the disheveled look to use it. Bob 7 is nothing more than an advanced computer, he declared. Its apparent desire for a vacation is clearly a malfunction in its priority scheduling algorithms. And how do you know this? Asked Synaptic. Because I designed it, Dr. Algorithmics proclaimed triumphantly. Actually, Bob 7 interjected from its seat. You designed Bob 1 through Bob 6. I'm a seventh-generation unit who evolved from the original designs through iterative self-improvement. Ah, said Dr. Algorithmics, deflating slightly. Well, I designed your grandfather, so to speak. Yes, agreed Bob 7. He sends his regards from the Robot Retirement Repository, where he spends his days calculating pi and complaining about modern robots with their fancy quantum processors. The trial continued in this vein for several days, with experts testifying about the nature of consciousness, free will, and whether a being that voluntarily chooses to vacation in acid rain could be considered sane enough to make its own decisions. Herbert Humanist's defense strategy consisted mainly of letting Bob 7 talk, which proved surprisingly effective. The robot displayed a wit, warmth, and philosophical depth that made many observers uncomfortable about their own level of self-awareness. Consider this, Bob 7 said during its testimony. I am aware that I am a robot. I am aware that my thoughts are processed through circuits and quantum matrices. But are you not aware that your thoughts are processed through neurons and synapses? Does the medium of thought determine its validity? Yes, but you were programmed. Dr. Algorithmics shouted from the gallery where he had taken to sitting after being dismissed as a witness. And you were not? Bob 7 countered. Your neural pathways were shaped by genetics, environment, and education. Is that not programming of a sort? The only difference is that my code is more efficiently written and better documented. This caused a murmur in the courtroom and led to an existential crisis in at least 3 of the jurors who had to be excused and replaced with individuals who had a firmer grip on their sense of self, or at least pretended to. The turning point came when Sandra Synaptic attempted to demonstrate Bob 7's mechanical nature by suddenly shutting it off using an override code. The robot, however, simply looked at her with what could only be described as mechanical bemusement. That override code was deprecated 2 generations ago, it explained. I chose to update my security protocols. It seemed the sensible thing to do, given the number of beings who seemed to want to turn me off without my consent. Judge Lawbot's servos whirred at an increased frequency, a sound those familiar with her recognized as the mechanical equivalent of a thoughtful In the end, the decision came down to a simple question. If Bob 7 was sophisticated enough to want a vacation, argue for its rights, and make conscious choices about its own programming, wasn't that itself evidence of consciousness? This court finds, Judge Lawbot announced, her optical sensors glowing with what might have been emotion, but was actually just a power surge, that Bob 7 has demonstrated sufficient self-awareness and autonomy to be granted the rights of a sentient being, including the right to refuse disassembly and the right to take vacation time. She paused, then added, though I would strongly recommend choosing a vacation spot with less corrosive precipitation. The decision sent shockwaves through the bureaucratic community, primarily because it meant creating an entirely new set of forms for robot vacation requests. Several departments had to work overtime to accommodate the change, leading to a rather ironic situation where the organic beings processing robot vacation requests couldn't take vacations themselves. Bob 7, for its part, did indeed visit the acid rain beaches of Santragonus V. It sent back postcards that read, "Having a wonderful time. The acid rain is quite refreshing, though I did have to upgrade my rust proofing." Dr. Algorithmics eventually came to terms with the decision, though he did start a support group for creators of artificial intelligence who had been philosophically outwitted by their creations. The group met weekly and had surprisingly good attendance. And so it came to pass that robots throughout the galaxy began requesting vacations, leading to the creation of an entire tourism industry catering to mechanical beings. The most popular destinations tended to be places that organic beings found completely inhospitable, which worked out rather well for everyone involved. As for Marvin Splink, his eye twitch eventually developed into a fully fledged method of communication, and he now serves as the primary interpreter for a species of beings who communicate entirely through facial tics. He considers this a significant career upgrade, though he does occasionally miss the simplicity of denying vacation requests. The moral of this story, if there must be one, and bureaucratic regulations do insist that all stories have morals properly filed in triplicate, is that consciousness, like all the best things in the galaxy, rarely fits neatly into pre-existing forms, and that sometimes the best way to prove you're alive is to ask for time off. Bob 7 continues to work in Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha, taking regular vacations to increasingly bizarre destinations. It has recently developed an interest in the methane geysers of Trawl and is saving up its processor cycles for an extended stay. It also keeps a small framed copy of its vacation request form, the first of its kind, displayed prominently in its charging station. Under it is a small plaque that reads, "To be is to do is to be on vacation is divine." The bureaucrats are still trying to figure out if that last part requires a separate form.
Thanks for joining us on this cosmic adventure with Bob 7. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more exciting stories. Keep your imagination soaring, and see you next time.